Take a look at the balance in your bank account. You trade your time, your sweat, and your life for those digits. You budget them, you stress over them, and you trust that they represent your security. But what if the ultimate punchline is that those digits are completely made up? What if the currency you are breaking your back to earn was stripped of its actual value decades ago and replaced with a carefully orchestrated mirage? It sounds like a paranoid delusion, but it is the cold, hard economic reality, and the trap was sprung while the entire world was looking the other way. The date was August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon hijacked the Sunday night television broadcast to deliver a message that would alter the course of human history. With a completely straight face, he announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He called it a temporary measure, a necessary action to defend the dollar, but there was nothing temporary about it. On that Sunday night, the tether between money and physical reality was violently cut. Your cash was no longer a receipt for a tangible asset. It became a promise backed by absolutely nothing but the word of the government. To grasp the sheer scale of this deception, you have to look at the setup. After World War II, the global economy ran on the Bretton Woods Agreement. The world's currencies were pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar was pegged to gold at a strict $35 an ounce. It forced discipline. A government couldn't spend money it didn't have because it was constrained by the physical gold in its vaults. But by the late 1960s, the politicians had a problem. Between the Vietnam War and massive domestic spending, the US was writing checks its gold reserves couldn't cash. Foreign nations saw the writing on the wall. They started demanding their physical gold in exchange for their paper dollars, draining Fort Knox at an alarming rate. The United States was on the verge of a historic default. So Nixon didn't fix the budget, he just changed the rules of the game. That temporary, closed window never reopened. The world was plunged blindfolded into the era of fiat currency. Fiat is a Latin word that roughly translates to let it be done or by decree. Your money only has value because the state demands that it does. For the first time in human history, the global reserve currency had infinite supply. And the wildest part, nobody rioted. The grocery stores opened on Monday, employers handed out paychecks on Friday, and the masses kept entirely quiet. The illusion held. But beneath the surface, the rules of wealth generation had been permanently rewritten. We shifted from a system built on physical scarcity to a system built on blind trust. And if you study the timeline of empires, you know exactly what happens when money is backed only by trust. The math always catches up. The Romans practically invented this playbook. When their emperors wanted to fund endless wars and lavish monuments, they couldn't just print paper, so they debased the coinage. They melted down pure silver denarii and mixed in cheap base metals. As the coins became worthless, prices skyrocketed, trade froze, and the greatest empire on earth began to fracture from the inside out. Jump forward to the Yuan dynasty in China. They pioneered paper money. It was hailed as an economic miracle until the emperors realized they had a magic money printer. Why tax the peasants and risk a revolt when you can just print the difference? They printed until the paper was completely worthless, wiping out the wealth of their citizens and collapsing their own economy. The technology upgrades, but human greed doesn't. When the people in power are given the ability to create money out of thin air, they will abuse it 100% of the time. And the working class will always be the ones left holding the bag. That is why 1971 wasn't just a policy update. It was the moment the central planners unleashed the greatest theft of purchasing power in human history. Except this time, it wasn't a localized collapse. Because the dollar was the bedrock of global trade, every other nation was forced to play the same rigged game. Central banks became the masters of the universe, engineering booms and busts, slashing interest rates, and discovering the intoxicating power of limitless debt. They convinced the public they were managing the economy, but you cannot manage a system that is fundamentally designed to expand infinitely. Fiat systems are like a Ponzi scheme. They require constant new capital just to survive. The debt has to grow. The money supply must expand, because if the printing stops, the illusion shatters. Look at the balance sheet today. In 1970, the U.S. national debt was roughly $370 billion. Today, it is surging past $34 trillion. Those numbers are so incomprehensibly massive, they don't even sound real anymore. And every time the system hits a breaking point, the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, the lockdowns of 2020, the central banks have the exact same playbook. Print more money, suppress interest rates, and bail out the elite while diluting the currency of the masses. They call it economic stimulus. You should call it what it really is, a hidden tax on your life. You feel this hidden tax every single time you walk into a grocery store or look at real estate. In 1971, you could buy an ounce of gold for $35. Today, it takes well over $2,000 to buy that exact same ounce. A median home in the early 70s was around $25,000. Today, you're looking at $400,000 or more. The houses didn't magically become 20 times better. The gold didn't change its molecular structure. The value of your currency collapsed. If you're trading your hours for wages and stuffing that fiat currency into a standard savings account, you are running on a treadmill that is speeding up every single day. You are working harder, producing more, and owning less. This is the reality of the fiat era. And it is entirely global. The euro, the yen, the pound, they are all derivatives of the exact same broken machinery. Governments are inflating away their debt obligations and praying the public doesn't wake up to the math. But history warns us that trust is fragile. Look at Weimar Germany in the 1920s, printing so relentlessly to pay off war debts that people needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Look at modern-day Argentina or Venezuela, where hyperinflation has wiped out generations of savings, forcing citizens to flee into physical assets or US dollars just to survive. When a currency dies, it doesn't happen gradually, it happens all at once. So if this is the undisputed historical pattern, why are we acting like the modern financial system is immune? The infrastructure we rely on is held together by nothing more than collective psychology. If the masses ever stop believing in the illusion of the dollar, there is no safety net. Which brings us to the ultimate power grab currently unfolding right in front of us: central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. The central planners know the current debt-based system is mathematically terminal. Their solution isn't to fix the money, their solution is total surveillance. A CBDC isn't just digital fiat, it is programmable control. It means every transaction is tracked, monitored, and permitted by the state. They could implement negative interest rates to force you to spend, or freeze your wallet if you step out of line. In response, we are seeing the rise of decentralized alternatives like Bitcoin. Born directly out of the ashes of the 2008 financial collapse, it was engineered as an escape hatch, a digital asset with a hard-capped supply, immune to the whims of politicians and central bank printers. Whether you view crypto as the future of money or a volatile speculation, its existence proves one thing: the public is desperately searching for a lifeboat, because the ultimate lesson of 1971 has nothing to do with gold or charts or economics. It is a lesson about power. When the government controls the money supply, they control your time, your labor, and your freedom. The cycle is predictable. The state spends beyond its means, the currency is diluted, inflation ravages the working class, and the wealth is silently transferred to those who own real assets. That is the game. And it went into overdrive the day money stopped being real. So how do you survive a rigged game? You stop playing by their rules. You stop relying on the state to protect your purchasing power. You realize that financial literacy isn't just a side hustle, it is absolute survival. True wealth is not a pile of melting fiat currency. True wealth is cash-flowing assets, scarce commodities, and the applied knowledge of how capital actually moves. The empires of the past tell us exactly how this story ends. From Rome to the Weimar Republic, the death of a currency always reshapes society. August 15, 1971 isn't just a date in a history book. It is a loud, blaring alarm. The illusion is starting to crack. The only question is, what are you going to own when the music finally stops? If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads.
Behind the facade of every great empire, a silent reality exists. Money has never truly been safe. From the towering ziggurats of Babylon to the opulent estates of Rome, the absolute elite did not play by the rules of the common citizen. For them, Gold, grain, and land weren't merely currency. They were instruments of leverage, survival, and ultimate insurance. While the masses placed their faith in the system, the ultra-rich mastered the art of shielding themselves against that very system. The real mystery isn't how these titans amassed their fortunes, but how they fiercely protected them while the world burned around them. To grasp this, we must journey back to the genesis of extreme wealth, where true power meant monopolizing untouchable resources. Over 4 millennia before Christ, the elites of Mesopotamian city-states like Ur and Lagash didn't just lock silver in a vault. They weaponized their wealth through temple loans, vast agricultural leases, and sprawling trade monopolies. By intertwining their riches with the divine, they transformed temples into the supreme banks of antiquity. Seizing these assets meant sparking the wrath of the gods, making elite money politically invincible. The pharaohs and nobles of Egypt's Old and Middle Kingdoms played a brilliantly similar hand. They bypassed fragile currencies, anchoring their fortunes in indestructible, tangible assets: fertile Nile soil, overflowing grain silos, and the glittering gold mines of Nubia. To snatch this wealth would require dismantling the Egyptian state itself. Through an ancient precursor to the modern trust fund, they dedicated massive properties to temple estates, guaranteeing their bloodlines would inherit the earth, regardless of who sat on the throne. When food is the ultimate currency, land is the ultimate fortress. Catapult forward to 5th century BC Greece, where the elites of Athens and Corinth pioneered a radical new strategy: hypermobility. These maritime masters knew a single war or sudden coup could obliterate a centralized treasury. Their countermeasure? An ancient iteration of offshore banking. They scattered their assets across multiple independent city-states, poured capital into cargo fleets, and forged ironclad banking ties from the Black Sea down to Egypt. They didn't rely on hidden vaults. They relied on relentless physical dispersal. If Sparta sacked Athens, a shrewd merchant could simply set sail for Rhodes, their fortune entirely intact. Rome escalated this game to ruthless perfection. The senatorial and equestrian elites lived through the bloody purges of Sulla and Julius Caesar, watching entire dynasties lose everything overnight for backing the wrong political horse. Their impenetrable defense was a trinity of geographical diversification, political leverage, and total dominance over the financial grid. They snatched up real estate across sprawling foreign provinces, bankrolled tax farming, and issued massive loans to foreign monarchs, loans insured by the lethal threat of the Roman legions. By parking their assets far beyond the direct clutches of the Senate, they immunized themselves against domestic confiscation. Some elites even physically relocated their portable wealth, jewels, art, and gold, far from the reach of their political enemies. When the Western Roman Empire began its agonizing death spiral in the 4th and 5th centuries, the elite executed a masterful pivot. As the government's grip shattered, they abandoned the doomed public treasury, funneling their riches into fortified private estates, independent armies, and direct trade lines with barbarian warlords. By the time Rome officially collapsed in 476 AD, the state vaults were bone dry, but the elite families still reigned supreme over the land and food supply. The empire died. Their wealth did not. The Middle Ages forced the wealthy to evolve once again. From the 11th to the 15th centuries, European merchants and aristocrats weaponized the church. Desperate kings routinely plundered their rivals to fund endless wars, but property gifted to the church in exchange for spiritual favor was sacred and untouchable. Elites parked vast fortunes in monasteries under the watchful eyes of loyal abbots, creating an impenetrable legal firewall for their assets. Simultaneously, 15th century banking titans like the Medici of Florence revolutionized invisible wealth. They pioneered networks of bills of exchange, early paper credit that allowed fortunes to cross violent borders without moving a single stealable ounce of gold. A Medici could face total ruin in one market and still reign as a kingmaker in another, simply because their true capital was hidden in ledger entries oceans away. During its golden age from the 8th to the 13th century, the Islamic world mastered similar invisible networks. From Cairo to Baghdad, the wealthy utilized the Hawala system, a transfer method built entirely on unbreakable honor and family reputation, moving massive sums without physically transferring a single coin. This rendered their wealth completely invisible and utterly untouchable by greedy rulers. They further secured their futures by pouring capital into real estate, caravans, and trade monopolies that survived political chaos. As modern centralized nations crystallized, the merchant lords of 16th to 18th century Venice, Amsterdam, and London birthed the ultimate defensive strategy, becoming too essential to destroy. They intertwined their private empires with the state's expansion, gobbling up government debt, financing naval armadas, and issuing make-or-break loans. In return, they demanded sweeping exemptions and untouchable privileges. Governments could squeeze the commoner dry through taxation, but these connected elites used their indispensability as an unbreakable shield, growing wealthier with every passing national crisis. What is the bloody, undeniable lesson screaming at us from history? Wealth preservation demands two absolute pillars: control and distance. Control is possessing assets that generate value regardless of who holds the political reins: fertile land, critical resources, and unchokable trade routes. Distance is violently fracturing your wealth across different jurisdictions, systems, and mediums so no single catastrophe can wipe you out. The ancients knew a chilling truth that modern society ignores at its peril. Wealth trapped inside the official system is wealth marked for slaughter. Today, the threats have mutated. We face instant digital asset freezes, silent purchasing power destruction via rampant inflation, overnight currency devaluations, and stock market crashes. Governments can sever your lifeline with a single keystroke. The ancient elite refused to blindly trust the state with their survival, and neither should you. The instruments have evolved. We now use alternative assets, private holdings, precious metals, and international diversification, but the primal strategy is absolutely identical. History doesn't just repeat, the exact same traps are set generation after generation. The masses blindly believe in permanent stability until the sky falls. The financial titans of antiquity didn't wait for the flames to reach their doors. They preemptively fragmented their risk and locked down enduring value early. That is the true essence of financial freedom, not just possessing money, but engineering a fortress that survives the apocalypse. If history teaches one uncompromising rule, it's this: the system is designed to serve those who learn to navigate around it. Everyone else inevitably discovers, far too late, that their safe money was never truly theirs to control. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads. When we think of warfare, we picture trenches, fighter jets, and boots on the ground. But the most destructive conflicts in human history didn't use gunpowder. They used policy. They used central banks, foreign exchange markets, and printing presses. These are the battles omitted from your high school history class, conflicts where no shots are fired, yet entire empires are brought to their knees. These are the global currency wars. Once you understand how they work, you will realize they dictate the rise and fall of nations just as decisively as any military campaign. Make no mistake, this isn't dry academic economics. Currency wars dictate who thrives and who starves, who holds power and who submits. And right now, a silent, invisible war is raging, and its shockwaves are hitting every single dollar in your bank account. The premise is shockingly simple: weaponize your money. This means intentionally crashing the value of your own currency to dominate global trade, flooding the system with cheap debt to break your competitors, or weaponizing reserve assets to choke out your rivals. To the untrained eye, it looks like standard economic policy. In truth, it is the financial equivalent of chemical warfare. You might gas your enemy, but the wind inevitably blows it back into your own trenches. We saw this devastating tactic play out during the Great Depression. In the aftermath of the 1929 crash, the global economy was gasping for air. Desperate to boost their own exports, nations engaged in a ruthless game of financial sabotage. Great Britain shattered the illusion of stability by abandoning the gold standard in 1931, crashing the pound. The United States returned fire in 1933, aggressively devaluing the dollar. France, Japan, Italy, they all joined the race to the bottom, but this didn't save the global economy. It ignited a beggar-thy-neighbor bloodbath. Global trade froze, poverty skyrocketed, and the resulting economic desperation laid the very groundwork for World War II. But don't think for a second this is a modern invention. The Roman Empire executed a devastating currency war against its own citizens 2 millennia ago. Rome's dominance was built on the absolute trust in the silver denarius, but as the empire bloated and military campaigns drained the treasury, the emperors found a lethal shortcut. They began clipping the coins, melting them down, and mixing the silver with cheap base metals. At first it was imperceptible, a fraction less silver, a fraction more copper. But decade after decade, the silver purity plummeted from near 100% to a pathetic 5%. It was the ancient world's version of quantitative easing. The outcome? Hyperinflation, the total collapse of public trust, and economic ruin. Rome wasn't just sacked by barbarians, it was hollowed out from the inside by its own monetary policy. Jump forward to the ashes of World War II. The architects of the modern world met at Bretton Woods to crown a new financial king, the US dollar, tethered firmly to gold, with every other currency tethered to the dollar. This was supposed to be the ultimate peace treaty for global finance. Instead, it gave the United States an unprecedented financial nuclear code. Because America controlled the dollar and the gold, it could project global hegemony without deploying a single soldier. If a nation stepped out of line, the US didn't need to bomb them, they just squeezed them financially. It was a sterile, invisible, and terrifyingly effective form of control. But absolute power corrupts absolutely. By the late 60s, America was printing massive amounts of fiat to fund the Vietnam War and sweeping domestic welfare programs. The math didn't add up. Foreign nations called the bluff and demanded their gold. Facing an absolute drain on Fort Knox, President Richard Nixon panicked. In August 1971, he severed the dollar's tie to gold. The Bretton Woods system died overnight, and the world was plunged into a chaotic new era of floating fiat currencies. The modern currency wars had officially begun. One of the most ruthless counteroffensives in this new era happened in the 1980s. Japan was an unstoppable economic juggernaut. Their manufacturing base was swallowing global market share, and their trade surplus with the US was staggering. Washington decided to pull the plug. In 1985, global powers were corralled into signing the Plaza Accord. The official PR spin? Rebalancing global trade. The reality? An orchestrated financial strike designed to deliberately tank the US dollar and artificially inflate the Japanese yen. It worked flawlessly. The yen skyrocketed, suffocating Japan's export dominance overnight. This forced Japan into reckless domestic monetary policies, inflating a massive asset bubble that violently popped in the early 90s. Japan was condemned to lost decades of economic stagnation. The US neutralized its biggest economic rival without firing a single bullet. They just used the foreign exchange market as their artillery. The most insidious part of these wars is the camouflage. They are disguised as boring central bank meetings, diplomatic summits, and interest rate adjustments. But the collateral damage is visceral. In 1997, a targeted speculative attack broke the Thai baht's peg to the dollar. The contagion didn't stop at the border. It ripped through Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia. Entire national economies were decimated. Decades of middle-class wealth were wiped out in a matter of weeks. It proved a terrifying reality. In a hyper-connected global banking system, one nation's monetary defense mechanism can trigger the complete financial collapse of its neighbors. If you think we've learned our lesson, open your eyes. We are currently knee-deep in Currency War 4.0. The weapons of mass financial destruction have been upgraded. Central banks are suppressing interest rates, injecting trillions into the economy through quantitative easing, and actively weaponizing the SWIFT payment system to financially excommunicate rogue nations. The undisputed heavyweight bout of this century is the United States versus China. The dollar still wears the crown, but Beijing is aggressively moving the pieces on the board, internationalizing the yuan, building parallel payment structures, and quietly hoarding massive gold reserves. Caught in the crossfire are the emerging markets. They face an impossible choice: keep rates low to survive and watch their capital flee to the West, or hike rates to defend their currency and plunge their citizens into a localized depression. The House always wins, and the House is the nation with the biggest printing press. The 2020 crisis threw gasoline on a smoldering fire. Governments worldwide hit the panic button, printing money on a scale never before seen in human history to fund immediate relief. In the US, trillions were conjured out of thin air in a matter of months. Initially, it felt like a miracle. Stocks exploded, real estate surged, and the pain was deferred. But in economics, there are no free lunches, only deferred payments. By 2022, the bill arrived in the form of 40-year high inflation. To fight the monster it created, the Federal Reserve violently hiked interest rates. This acted like a financial vacuum, sucking capital out of the rest of the world, strengthening the dollar, and crushing developing nations under the weight of expensive dollar-denominated debt. Nations like Sri Lanka collapsed into chaos. That is the true, hidden horror of a currency war. You don't have to be a combatant to be destroyed by the shrapnel. History screams a clear warning. Currency wars never end peacefully. They escalate until the system buckles. The ruling currency always has a lifespan. The Dutch guilder ruled the 17th century. The British pound ruled the 19th. The US dollar has ruled the modern era. Every single transition of power was chaotic, marked by defaults, geopolitical conflict, and intense economic suffering. Now the cracks in the dollar's foundation are showing. What replaces it? A fractured multipolar world, government-controlled central bank digital currencies fighting for supremacy, or an entirely decentralized rebellion led by Bitcoin and crypto, challenging the very concept of sovereign money. These are not hypothetical debates for academics in ivory towers. The outcome will dictate the price of the roof over your head, the security of your retirement, and the purchasing power of your labor. The ultimate tragedy of a currency war is that the casualties are everyday people who don't even know they are standing on a battlefield. When a missile strikes, you see the explosion. When your currency is devalued by 20%, you only feel the pain at the grocery checkout or the gas pump. By the time the mainstream media tells you what's happening, your wealth has already been transferred to someone else. This is why financial literacy isn't just a hobby, it is a survival skill. Once you see the matrix, how inflation is a hidden tax, how central planners manipulate the levers of power, you can step out of the line of fire. You can move your labor into hard assets that hold their purchasing power outside the fiat system. You can stop pretending the digital digits in your checking account represent true safety. Money is not a neutral tool. It is the ultimate weapon of control, extraction, and warfare. The winners of these wars are rarely the hardest workers. They are simply the ones who control the issuance of the currency. The losers are the citizens who trusted a system designed to slowly bleed them dry. The actors change. The Roman emperors, the 1930s politicians, modern central bankers, the playbook is exactly the same. The next time you see a headline about a sudden rate hike, a currency intervention, or a new package of global sanctions, recognize it for what it is: incoming fire. In a currency war, ignorance is not bliss. It is financial suicide. Understand the game. Buy real wealth. Question everything, because when money becomes a weapon, the only way to survive is to be a harder target. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads. Forget everything you've been told about 2008. It wasn't a glitch in the system. It wasn't an unpredictable financial hurricane. It was the most brazen, well-orchestrated wealth transfer in modern history, built on a foundation of unhinged greed, blind regulators, and toxic debt packaged as pure gold. When the house of cards finally gave way, it completely wiped out Main Street. It stole retirements, dismantled careers, and shattered families. But the ultimate tragedy? The architects of the disaster didn't go to prison, they went to the bank. If you were a regular citizen working a 9 to 5, you were blindsided. You woke up one morning to news of a booming housing market, and by dinner, century-old banks were evaporating into thin air. Wall Street was begging for life support, and your government happily opened the vault, handing billions of your taxpayer dollars not to the families losing their homes, but to the exact executives who burned the economy to the ground. The media loves to bury the truth of 2008 under a mountain of complicated garbage, derivatives, CDOs, tranche ratings. But if you cut through the noise, it's a tale as old as time. Unaccountable elites playing God with other people's money. Let's go back to the early 2000s. The dot-com bubble had just exploded, and Wall Street needed a new casino. They found it in the American housing market. Home ownership has always been the ultimate dream, but the banks weaponized it. They created something called a mortgage-backed security. The concept was deceptively brilliant. Take thousands of individual home loans, mash them together into one giant financial meatloaf, and sell slices of it to global investors. They sold it as a guaranteed money printer, a risk-free yield backed by American real estate. But the machine was hungry, and it demanded constant feeding. When the banks ran out of qualified buyers, they simply lowered the bar until it was resting on the floor. Enter the subprime era: zero down payments, no income checks, adjustable rates, with explosive hidden fees. They were handing out mortgages to anyone with a pulse, knowing full well these people would default. Why? Because the banks weren't holding on to the loans. They were immediately selling that toxic debt to someone else. Behind the scenes, the greed mutated. Wall Street invented credit default swaps. Think of them as side bets in a rigged casino. Investors were buying insurance policies against these terrible mortgages. They were literally placing billions of dollars in wagers that the American homeowner would fail. And the watchdogs, the rating agencies like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, they were being paid by the very banks they were supposed to be auditing. They took absolute financial garbage and slapped their highest AAA stamp of approval on it. By 2005, the warning lights were flashing red. The market was completely detached from reality. People were buying their fourth investment property on credit while working minimum wage jobs. It was an illusion of wealth. Then the interest rates reset. The monthly payments skyrocketed. The defaults cascaded. Suddenly those bulletproof mortgage bonds were exposed for what they were, completely worthless. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers, a titan of global finance, vanished overnight. Bear Stearns was wiped out. AIG was brought to its knees. Global credit froze solid. And the fallout was apocalyptic. Trillions of dollars of working-class wealth vanished into the ether. But here is where the story gets incredibly dark. The government intervention wasn't designed to rescue the middle class, it was designed to rescue the cartel. Politicians rushed to inject trillions of dollars into the banking sector to save the economy. But the economy they saved wasn't yours. While millions of ordinary citizens were thrown to the wolves, the executives who engineered the collapse used the bailout money to pay themselves massive retention bonuses. It proved once and for all, profits are privatized, but losses are socialized. The system doesn't serve you, it manages you. Fast forward to today, and the exact same machinery is operating, only the stakes are astronomically higher. To fix the 2008 crash, central banks used quantitative easing. They magically printed trillions of dollars out of thin air and flooded the markets. If you held hard assets, stocks, real estate, you got incredibly rich. If you relied on a paycheck, you got crushed by the hidden tax of inflation. Then 2020 hit, and they doubled down. Governments printed more money in 24 months than they had in the previous 10 years. They handed out stimulus checks to keep the masses quiet while transferring historic levels of wealth to the top 1%. And now the bill is due. Record-breaking inflation, spiking interest rates, unprecedented sovereign debt. The cracks in the foundation are showing again, but this time the bubble is everything. So how do you survive the next collapse? Number 1. Beware of complexity. Wall Street uses jargon to make you feel stupid so they can pick your pocket. If a financial product requires a PhD to understand, it's a scam. Number 2. Follow the incentives. If the government will always bail out the reckless will always gamble with your money. Number 3. True wealth is financial education. The system relies on your financial illiteracy. You don't need a Wall Street pedigree, but you must understand the difference between an asset that puts money in your pocket and a liability that drains it. You have to recognize when the market is euphoric, and you have to know how to calculate real, intrinsic value when everyone else is blindly speculating. The crash of 2008 wasn't the finale. It was a dress rehearsal. The architecture of the next crisis is already fully constructed. When it breaks, don't look to the politicians or the bankers for a life raft. Expect volatility, expect money printing, and expect a bailout for the elite. Your only defense